From a journey, William Henry is back from his 14 days in Egypt with new discoveries, and William has spent a lot of time in Egypt with the National Geographic Channel and a number of lucky people who signed up for this tour. And William, this is not really a tour, it's something else that you do there, is that correct?
Well, our tours are really explorations, Whitley. It's a gathering of minds and souls who are there to join together to try and root out the answers to the questions that have perplexed us for a long time. Where did we come from? What are we doing here? And for some of us, how do we leave?
How do we leave? The question is becoming more and more urgent, and it will be, within 10 years, the central question among human beings. That is, and that makes this work that you're doing all the more urgent. Before we get into the actual journey and some of the stunning discoveries that you've made, let's talk a little bit about the actual experience of being in Egypt now, which is, of course, not far from Iraq. It's a Muslim country. What did you feel a sense of hostility or anything at all?
No sense of hostility whatsoever on the well-beaten tourist path that we were on. In fact, the only time that I came into contact with a person that might have what you might call hostile was in a marketplace, and that one of the questions I always ask you is, where are you from? And some of the people in our group would say they're from Canada or elsewhere, but I had no problem saying I was from America and I'm an American. He said, well, we really like your people, but we hate your government. I said, well, that's kind of funny because a lot of people on the tour sort of feel the same way. So we have something in common after all.
Well, that was a diplomatic way of addressing the issue. Now, you said you were on a well-beaten tourist trail, which you were, but not so well-beaten, actually, for someone who's looking through it with the eyes of William Henry. Tell us a little bit about the National Geographic Channel and why they followed you.
Well, about a month before we were to depart on the trip, they contacted us. They had been looking at one of the works by a gentleman who was joining us on the trip and thought that they might be interested in interviewing him, which it turns out they weren't. And along the way, they came upon the research that I had been doing and my insistence that if you really want to know about Atlantis, which was the subject of the documentary that they were working on, if you want to know about Atlantis, you have to look to Egypt. And the reason is because Plato's story of Atlantis originated in Egypt. And so when I started talking with the producer, her name's Cara Biega, it made a lot of sense to her. She said they're kind of over or tired of the same old story all the time about Atlantis, the Casey predictions, the geologist theory that the explosion of the volcano on Thera resolves the Atlantis question. And so they had been down that path so many times before, and what they were looking for was a breath of fresh air or a new perspective on this story. And so they signed up for the trip with us, came along, and I think the result is going to be quite interesting.
Well, I should say so, because the National Geographic Channel has certainly a history of going very much down the conventional pathway with this type of documentary, and one would think that they would go to Egypt, talk to Zahi Hawass, laugh at someone like you, and that would be it. Did you get the impression that was what was going to happen?
Exactly the opposite, Whitley. In fact, when we were making the arrangements for the trip, they acknowledged that they too have to tiptoe around on eggshells as concerns Zahi Hawass, that he makes it difficult even for the National Geographic Channel to acquire filming permits and to get into certain sites because he's so paranoid, apparently, in my view, about what a person might discover there. So I was pleasantly surprised by the open-mindedness of the producers and the cameraman that was with us, who, by the way, was the cameraman for the Josh Bernstein show, the hit show on the History Channel called Digging for the Truth. The gentleman that was with us is the cameraman. His name's Rich Confalone. He's Josh Bernstein's cameraman as well, and so I got a lot of insight into how Josh Bernstein puts his shows together. It was really great on-the-job training. But what I'm wanting to say is that they were incredibly open-minded. Rich has been all over the world with Josh Bernstein looking at sites. And one of the places that we went together, which we're going to talk about in here in a moment, Abu Ghurab, he said was probably the strangest place he's ever been. The producer, Kara Biaga, was completely open-minded in terms of my perspective. She listened to my lecture. She sat in on the lecture. She followed us around for 5 days. And by the end, she said, you know what? I get it. I get what you're saying. I get where you're coming from. And she was actually really excited about how this opens up the whole Atlantis argument in a brand new way.
Now, we're going to go on to the actual experience in just a moment, to Abu Ghurab in particular. But before that, I'm still sort of in modern times because of the Zahi Hawass issue, which is an issue. It's an issue for everybody, in not only in areas like you study, but also in more conventional archaeology. And what is happening there? Do you think he's involved in seeking out? Is it that he doesn't want people to find things before he does, so that he will be able to steal them and sell the artifacts, or is it something else, more darker even than that?
I think that I leaned a little bit more towards the dark side, Whitley. My personal view, there was such intense activity on the Giza Plateau, specifically around the Sphinx, in the years from 1996 to 1998 and 1999. And then all of a sudden, there's absolutely nothing. It's been 6-7 years since anybody has really talked about any of this activity, about the Hall of Records underneath the Sphinx and these chambers loaded with artifacts. In my view, my intuition, I think he's already found something. I think he's already got the goods, and now all he's doing is standing guard and making sure that no newcomers come along and discover what it is that he might have found and attempt to really bring out the truth of what's going on the Giza Plateau.
Now, why would that be? Since it would seem that since this would be so important to mankind, it would vastly increase the prestige of Egypt.
Yeah, but it would diminish the prestige of Allah at the same time, and that's the problem. I think they are completely motivated not just by politics, but also by religion, because it counters the whole idea that these phenomenal machines, which is what I believe the Great Pyramid is, were built not by the Egyptians, but by an earlier race. And what they come along with then is that, well, if you don't believe that the Egyptians built the pyramids, then you must be a racist, because you're trying to deny Egypt its heritage, and you're trying to say that the Egyptian people don't have the capability of doing this. And in fact, that's not what we're saying at all. What we are saying is that up until 1932, before the time of the Nazis, it was a well-established belief in Egyptology that this ancient race existed that had a superior technology, and they were referred to as a super race, as an advanced race. But now individuals such as Zahi Hawass are doing absolutely everything they can to discredit this notion, and in so doing, they're denying ancient human history.
Now, isn't this even larger than that, though? The Viking orbiter found an image on the surface of Mars of a face. I had that image studied at some of the best laboratories of that era. And in fact, even laboratories that were used by the National Security Agency for studying and analyzing aerial photography of the Earth and satellite photography of the Earth, using the same equipment that they used for the NSA, equipment that was then so secret that when we went into the lab, the equipment that they were actually working on had to be covered. We couldn't even see the buttons and so forth. Now, the more recent orbiters come with more detailed imagery, and it's quite clear to the imagers who did the original Viking material for me that the actual object on Cydonia was changed. It's not the same as it was when it was first seen from a distance by Viking. In other words, it's been changed on the ground, William. And I can't get them to commit to this in an interview. But they're telling me this and have been telling me this for years. Now, that is extraordinary, and it suggests that there is somebody with those same powers still around who is proactively trying to keep mankind in the dark. And maybe even when you look at the modern religions, they are part of a much larger process of blinding us to our real nature and our real past. Reaction?
Oh, I totally go along with that. In fact, you probably recall some of the recent conversations we've had on Dreamland, for example, with John Lash and our discussions about the archons and the specific references to this race of beings that match the gray aliens who appear in the early Gnostic texts. Those early Gnostic texts came from Egypt. And so at least 2,000 years ago, there was this understanding that a predatory race was involved with Earth humans. Now, whether or not the archons are involved with any of the activity on Mars, that's open to speculation. However, if you want to figure in Zecharia Sitchin's research, he seems to think that the Anunnaki of the Sumerian gods were responsible for those constructions on Mars, and that the gray aliens, what we think of as the gray aliens, may in fact be subservient or minions of the Anunnaki. So that opens up the possibility here that the people that are doing the funny business on Mars could be the very same folks, the Anunnaki, who Sitchin says were responsible for those constructions originally.
Unlike Whitley Strieber, who tends to be rather of a hermit, William Henry gets around. And you can go to some of his upcoming events. May 6th in Kempton, Illinois. He's going to be with David Hatcher Childress and Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn, of course, one of the great pyramid researchers of all time. And then on June 17th, he's going to be in Nashville, Awakening the Temple of Light Nashville Conference. From June 6th to October 8th, the Quest for Immortality exhibit comes to Nashville. It's the largest collection of Egyptian artifacts outside of Egypt. It features a recreation of the tomb of Thutmose III and the founder of the Illuminati and the Rosicrucians, and you can see it with William Henry. July the 19th, he's going to be at the Orange County MUFON. July the 20th, the LA MUFON. September 9th and 10th, the Bay Area UFO Expo. So don't miss it. You can go on William's website, williamhenry.net, to find out what's going on in the world of William Henry. Well worth attending any of his lectures. I've done it, and we never fail to be informed, no matter how often we attend. Startling evidence that the Earth-Moon-Sun system is a temple of souls crafted by a profound intelligence. The first time ever you will hear this. Out beyond the stars, a divine and blessed realm free of the materiality of this earthly one, pointed to by the ancient Egyptians. Plato's story of Atlantis and Egypt as the island of creation, all of this and more in an amazing 6-hour 3-DVD set from William Henry. And subscribers, you can get $2 off by inputting the coupon code EG1 as you check out, plus your additional 10% subscriber discount. You will not hear any more ads during the program. Well, welcome back. We're talking to William Henry about his remarkable trip to Egypt, his website, williamhenry.net. Don't miss it. Don't miss his events. Don't miss his books and the new DVD set available now from the unknowncountry.com store. His lectures on Egypt based on this journey. William, let's now go and begin to talk a little bit about, and I think rather than going directly to Abu Ghraib, I'm sorry. Does that mean the same thing in Iraq that it does?
I don't think it means the same thing. No, it's the same sounding, looking word, but it means something different. It means crow's nest in Egypt, and I'm not sure what it means in Iraq.
Oh, well, good. So I'm in a way, it's kind of creepy that these words are like this. Okay, now I think the best thing to do is to try to. I want people to really get a sense of what you're finding and what has actually been lost, because it isn't exactly information of the kind that you can put down on paper, nor is it so made unavailable, say, by Zahi Hawass. As much as he may try, he can't actually do that. He can make the physical records unavailable. He can hide those findings, and like the findings on Mars are being hidden by someone who has extraordinary capabilities. That can be done, but there's something else speaking to people in Egypt. Could you talk to us a little bit about the way the stones speak and what they may say and some of your experiences with this?
Right, yeah. I mean, and that's a great question, Whitley, because it made the crucial difference between this trip to Egypt and my first one, which was in 2004. Along the way, in the gap between the two trips, I had done a lot more research. I had interviewed Stephen Mailer, who, by the way, we'll be talking with in the subscriber section today. I've talked with other authors who have experienced Egypt in a state of heightened awareness. And what Stephen had talked about that really piqued my imagination was this idea that in order to really get Egypt, you've got to go and experience it using both sides of your brain. In other words, a scholar using strictly his left brain is not going to get it. He's going to look at the temples, he's going to look at the Great Pyramid, and he's going to begin measuring. He's going to begin counting the number of stones. He's going to begin making certain other observations that really don't have a lot to do with a true appreciation of the temple. It's only when you join the right side of the brain and indeed make the heart-mind connection that you begin to put yourself in a heightened state of awareness that enables you to actually begin to communicate with the temples themselves. In fact, one of the things that Stephen and others alerted me to was to this notion that you can actually feel the temples, and that's actually the best way to approach them. I was even surprised that Michael Bajan, who wrote Holy Blood, Holy Grail, talked about this very same thing in his new book, The Jesus Papers, about how different it is when you go into the temples intent on not trying to master them in the sense of knowing all the facts about them, but instead allowing the stones themselves of the temple to raise your spiritual awareness. And it turns out that is exactly what they were designed to do.
And you've had experiences with this.
I did. And part of what really enabled it, we had on our trip a very special guest. Her name is Anya Nadell. She paints mandalas, which use colors and sacred geometry that begin to create this heightened state of awareness. And one of the tip-offs to me that I was actually already beginning to engage in this mindset, if you will, had to do with one of her mandalas called Wisdom. And in this painting, she had shown this mandala, and one of the symbols that she used in it was a pyramid with a blue eye precisely in the center of the pyramid. I was absolutely blown away when I saw this because the first time I had been in Egypt, I was meditating in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. I had just kind of slid my back down the red granite wall there and imagined myself exactly where I was at the center of the land masses of the planet. And I just simply opened my heart and began to send love energy to my family, friends, and loved ones. And before I knew it, here came this blue eye, literally out of nowhere, that was dancing around in my mind's eye and beaming what I can only describe as bliss at me. This went on for several minutes, and after we left the Great Pyramid, I asked the group, I said, hey, did anybody else experience this blue eye that was dancing around beaming bliss? And of course, no one else had. And I spent the rest of the trip looking for an example of this blue eye that I could take home as a token, as a something to remember this experience by. A few days later, I was down in the museum in Luxor, and I found this little $3 pyramid, a little golden pyramid that had the blue eye exactly like I had seen precisely in the middle of the pyramid. And I began to wonder, is it possible that I had somehow connected with what you might think of as the software for the pyramid? I mean, we know there's this hardware sitting in front of us, these incredible stone structures, but is it possible that there is also software that goes along with it that one can connect with if they're in the right frame of mind or state of heightened awareness. Well, Anya comes along with this incredible painting, and there she has it, the pyramid with the blue eye exactly in the middle of the pyramid. And right then I said, well, she must have connected with the same kind of experience that I had. And it turns out she had. And her paintings, she features in a book called Holographic Mandalas, and you can see them on her website, which is eternalimagery.com. Her mandalas are designed to put you into that heightened state of awareness. And this became a sort of real tutorial for me throughout the trip. And as I'm walking through the temples with Anya, she's pointing out things from her perspective as an artist and sacred geometer that were enabling me to connect with these temples in ways that I had never imagined possible.
And William is hoping to interview her for Dreamland. We don't yet know whether or not she'll be willing to come on the air, but the book is quite remarkable. And as William was talking, I was actually looking at it. Now let's now go from there to before we leave, though, there is something that I must ask you. And of course, it's the question that will be on a lot of other people's minds as well. This eye that you're seeing and that is so much a part of the lore of the pyramid, it reminds us all, of course, of the figure on the back of the dollar bill.
Yes. I'm convinced that what I had connected with is what's called the blue eye of Horus, which is represented by the eye on the back of the dollar bill. I believe that it is a consciousness. I have no doubt in my mind that what I was experiencing or connecting with inside the king's chamber was a sentient being of some kind, a vastly superior intelligence that I believe is part and parcel of the entire pyramid experience. And so I believe that it's not just the Great Pyramid where an experience such as this is possible, but rather virtually all of the temples were designed with the intention of enabling people to experience this heightened state of awareness and connect with the sacred energies that were known to the ancient Egyptians as the netters, the divine ones, the sacred beings.
Now, the netters were physical, but only at times. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, they're typically thought of as energy forms or energy beings. However, ancient or indigenous Egyptian tradition that we'll talk about also suggests that they can manifest in physical form. This leads one to think that we might be dealing with some form of a light being or an interdimensional being of some kind, but primarily researchers such as John Anthony West, Stephen Mailer think of the netters as simply as sacred energies. But to answer your question, yes, they do take human form, not human form, but rather physical form.
At times.
And
And perhaps only under certain conditions.
Right. And that's the kind of the whole key is what are those conditions and how did they manifest in the ancient world? And can we connect with them yet today? And I believe we can.
Now, we can go back a vast distance in time to the beginning of a system, a triad, a cosmic triad, a triad that is designed to evoke life. This is the triad of the earth, the moon, and the sun. The sun is the positive energy of the triad, the moon the negative energy of the triad. And by negative, I do not mean bad or evil. Please forget that. That's not what it's about. If you don't understand negativity in terms of balance, then look it up. The earth, of course, being the third force, where the balance takes place, and the balance between the energies is what draws life out of the planet. Very specifically and physically, the heat of the sun and the cooling effect of the moon, that is to say, the effect that the moon has of slowing down the flow of the atmosphere across the earth that is caused by the rotation of the planet itself. The moon's slightly slower orbiting of the earth puts the brakes on it. So instead of a continuous wind blowing at around 280 to 300 miles an hour on the earth and ensuring that no higher life forms would ever exist here, we have a complex, ever-changing weather pattern that is highly conducive to life. But we go back billions upon billions of years to when this was done. Could it be, William, that the same beings that are now remanifesting themselves among us who were here before and perhaps even built the pyramids were here then, that long ago?
I think it's entirely possible, Whitley. I mean, Egyptian legend says that Tahuti, better known as Thoth or Thoth in the West, the moon god, he's credited with designing the Great Pyramid. And so when you take that right at its most simplistic and face value, you have to begin to make a connection between the moon and the Great Pyramid. And in fact, I mean, as you're suggesting here, with you take away the moon, there is no life on this planet. The moon is what science says is responsible for plate tectonics. The moon is responsible for the tides.
Yes.
If you take out the moon, Earth is a water world. There is no land. And
well, Earth is unlivable without the moon. The moon is an essential ingredient, and incidentally, not just to this living planet, but to any planet that is going to sustain higher complex life forms. There must be something there like the moon.
Mm-hmm. And I started to really look at the moon after we had Don Brownlee, that NASA scientist on, who was talking about Project Stardust. Because he said in his book, Rare Earth, that science says that the likelihood that an Earth-like planet should have such a large moon is incredibly small. In fact,
yes,
it's practically a miracle.
Yeah, exactly. It isn't. It's really the statistical probability of it is so infinitesimal that it's unmeasurable. And on that note, the note of the unmeasurable, we're going to have to take a little break, and we'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. We're back talking to William Henry, his website, williamhenry.net. You heard a commercial for his wonderful new DVD collection. Do not miss getting it. Get into this. This is what your soul needs. This is the real food here. This is the stuff that so many people are being duped into not taking this food, but do take it. William, let's now talk a little bit more about the findings. Tell us a little bit about the most ancient pyramid in Egypt and what it's like there.
I went to a site called Abu Ghurab, which is considered to be it's a closed to the public archaeological site, and I can completely understand why it's closed, because this place is so fragile. It's so pristine. It's as if it hasn't changed in thousands upon thousands of years. According to indigenous Egyptian tradition that was chronicled by Stephen Mailer's teacher, Hakim, we're told that Abu Ghurab is the oldest ceremonial center on the planet. And in fact, according to Hakim, he says that this was the site. This was the precise dot of real estate where the ancients connected with those divine or sacred energies known as the netters. And in fact, he believes that ancient Egyptian legend says that the netters landed at Abu Ghurab. Now, if we're talking about star beings coming to Earth and landing at this place, it suggests to me that what we're actually dealing with at this site is in fact what today we call a stargate. Perhaps an interdimensional portal of some kind, a place where these divine beings were coming and going from the stars.
Absolutely fascinating. And when you say coming and going from the stars, what's your impression of the how of this?
When you're at Abu Ghurab, you come upon this massive alabaster platform. Alabaster is a word that means Egyptian crystal. You're encountering a massive platform that's about 15 feet on a side. It's a giant mandala. In fact, this alabaster mandala is the same pattern that Anya Nadal uses in the mandala that we spoke of a moment ago that had the blue eye in it, which is kind of a very interesting coincidence or synchronicity in and of itself. But this platform is entirely composed of crystal. It's in the shape of a mandala, which is a square that has 4 points indicating the 4 directions, and it has about a 4-foot in diameter circle in the center of it. When Chris Dunn went and visited this place in 1999, he immediately saw evidence of advanced machining that accounted for the smooth sides of it, that accounted for the rounded features of it, that accounted for the drill marks that you can plainly see still on the surface of this platform. And so what I think that we're dealing with here, it appears it's some kind of a beam me up Scotty type technology. We know that crystal has been used to create these heightened state of awareness, and it's just possible that these netter beings were utilizing this crystal of this massive platform as some form of a conductor that enabled them to toggle between the worlds.
Did you actually walk on it?
I walked on it. I meditated on it. I explored it in every way, shape, and form that I could. In fact, I went there 3 times. The first time with National Geographic when we began our interview about Atlantis, and I went there armed with limited knowledge. What I knew, I'd learned from Stephen Mailer and another researcher named Bob Vauder. And so the first time I'm there, it's like the first time you're at the pyramid. You're in awe of what you're seeing, and you don't have a whole lot of extra brain power to really try and figure out what's going on. You're just running around every 5 seconds making some kind of a amazing new discovery, looking at these incredible basins that appear to have had some kind of gears that might have been some sort of a molding for some kind of a foundry or something. You're looking at the ruins of a pyramid with these red granite facing stones that somebody used incredible precision to cut, polish, and put into place. You're looking at this alabaster platform, and in addition to that, it's what you're feeling while you're there. You're feeling this incredible sense of peace. You're feeling like you're literally in the middle of nowhere, maybe even on the moon, because the desertscape around it is so amazingly lunar. And you're in every way, shape, and form recognizing that you're at a tremendously ancient place. Egyptology says that this place was made around 2500 BC by a pharaoh. And I intentionally like to use the word made because made indicates something that is created or manufactured, but it's also a police term for identified. And so when I say the pharaoh made it in 2500 BC, I'm allowing for the possibility that he rediscovered something that is in fact far more ancient than 5,000 years ago. In fact, Hakeem, as Stephen Mailer will tell us, believes that the site is at least probably 10 to 12,000 years old, if not, in fact, much older than that.
Now, the Anunnaki, you mentioned to me that there was a relationship between the structure or the outline or the plan of Teotihuacan in Mexico City, where it was believed, who was it who said that was a place where the Anunnaki got
Zacharias Sitchin.
Zacharias Sitchin, that's right.
That's right.
They created gold there somehow?
Yes, exactly. Another of the guests on our tour is Ted St. Rain, who, if anyone has been to a UFO conference in the 10 years, you know Ted as the video guy that has been at every major conference. He's been literally around the world with Zacharias Sitchin, including to Teotihuacan, to Baalbek, Lebanon, elsewhere, Syria, been in all the museums with Sitchin and knows his stuff very, very well. And in addition, Ted knows most other researchers' material extremely well as well, because he's known them for years. He's been videotaping and has had just an incredible educational experience through his profession. So the third time that we went to Abu Ghurab, Ted was with us, and it didn't take long before Ted's walking around and he's saying, you know what? If you really want to understand what we're seeing here at this place, you got to take a look at Sitchin's book, The Lost Realms. In that book, Sitchin describes Teotihuacan near Mexico City and the use of the Pyramid of the Sun there as a device, as a processing plant whereby he believes it was the Anunnaki who channeled water underneath the pyramid at Teotihuacan and had placed mica also underneath this complex, and were somehow utilizing the mica and utilizing the pyramid in order to zap the water so that gold would drop out of the water. The Anunnaki would then collect the gold, and off they went.
What were they using the gold for?
Well, that's open to speculation. Of course, if you follow the work of Zecharia Sitchin, he suggests that the Anunnaki had an atmospheric problem on their home world, Nibiru, and that they were actually mining the gold to ship back to Nibiru to repair their decaying atmosphere. I'm not so sure about that. Another definition or possible use of this gold is that they were somehow utilizing it as a food source, as juice of gold, as the term alchemy is also known to mean. So I think it's possible that what they were ultimately doing is creating what Lawrence Gardner calls the white powder gold through this process, and maybe even utilizing this gold as a source of food to feed their light bodies, as Gardner suggests.
That's my sense of it, certainly. My few little experiences with modern equivalents of white powder gold have really suggested that there is something there, that there is a body that can be fed and enlarged by it, but it's a real double-edged sword for us because it's a heavy metal, and you take too much heavy metal into your system and you get into a lot of trouble. We may have a metabolism. It's a little bit like some of the higher human foods being indigestible to animals. It might be that white powder gold, while it will have an effect on us, is essentially indigestible to us.
Right. And so as Ted's looking around Abu Ghraib, he's saying, wait a minute, Sitchin had said that there were drainage holes that were present at Teotihuacan, and Sitchin theorized that they were used to sluice the gold into chambers, and this is where the Anunnaki would collect it.
William, I'm sorry, I missed my cue on the break. I was going to get into this after the break, but we're going to have to take the break right now. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to William Henry about his remarkable journey to Egypt and what happened and what he found there. And he's going to be talking in the subscriber section to William Mailer, who's been on Dreamland and who has a great deal of knowledge about essentially how to use Egypt as a source of spiritual empowerment. And we don't mean the kind of spiritual empowerment you're used to hearing about at all. We're talking about something very, very different. When we left the air a moment ago, we were touching on white powder gold and on the nurturing of the light body. And that, you think, William, is what all of this was about also in Egypt.
I think it's a very good possibility, Whitley, and I have to introduce the caveat that neither Stephen Mailer nor Zecharia Sitchin would probably go along with that supposition. They're just coming from different places. But again, my theory on that is based on the understanding that the Anunnaki, according to Sumerian lore, were clearly practicing alchemists. What were they doing with this alchemical practice? Why did they need to come to Earth to mine gold at all if they were in fact alchemists? Why didn't they just stay out in space and grab a hunk of space rock and transmute that into gold? I think that they were, when they came here, they had set up these processing plants utilizing water in order to create a product that we might refer to as the juice of gold. And this is the Chinese definition of the word alchemy, juice of gold. What were they doing with this juice of gold? Well, we know that they, according to Lawrence Gardner's perspective on this and the story of Moses on Sinai, that there was a technology or a technique, a possibility of anyway, whereby alchemists could transmute gold into a powder that they then poured into water and drank, creating a form of juice. And so it's based on these connections that I'm making here that I suggest that maybe that's what the Anunnaki were in fact doing at this place, was utilizing this technology, a pyramid that was perhaps the power source that drove this whole thing. They would channel water in from the Nile, process it through this pyramid, run it through these massive basins or sluices that we still see in the ground at Abu Ghurab, and thereby process this water, allowing the gold to drop out. Now, the only thing that was missing for us to really complete Ted's theory at Abu Ghurab was mica, because mica, again, was the critical component that was brought into Teotihuacan, probably from Brazil, maybe even from America. It's certainly not indigenous to Mexico, and as far as I know, it's not indigenous to Egypt as well. But the mica was the critical piece that we were looking for. And once again, our very talented artist, Anya Nadell, comes along. She's not only an artist, but she's a rock hound. She starts walking around in front of the pyramid at Abu Ghurab, and lo and behold, something remarkable is discovered. Huge sheets of mica in front of the pyramid. What it appeared to us is that we have a near-perfect match between the Abu Ghurab pyramid and the mica in the water basins and sluices with what Sitchin describes as going on at Teotihuacan.
Well, I have seen the mica at Teotihuacan. Have you seen it, and can you describe it? Or
I've actually only seen the depictions of it. In fact, Eric von Daniken writes about it in his magazine Legendary Times, and there's a photograph of him with the mica and describing the mystery. And von Daniken, to be fair, and is still clueless about what they were doing with it. He describes that it has an insulating capability, which is why it's used in high-frequency technology, radar equipment, and now in computers. It's resistant to all organic acids. But he can't explain what was this doing there, and why were they placing mica in alternating layers. They would use the natural rock, then put some mica, then some natural rock, and more mica, sandwiching the mica in between the natural rock. Well, the answer comes from Sitchin. They were utilizing the mica in this water treatment or gold processing treatment or process, where they were perhaps mining just gold, or perhaps they were creating the juice of gold, as I'm describing.
Now, no one has noticed this mica at Abu Ghurab before?
Honestly, Whitley, no one has hardly noticed Abu Ghurab, period. It's off the beaten path. Mailer has commented on it. And John Anthony West, in his, for example, his wonderful book, his guidebook to Egypt, doesn't even mention it. So what I'm saying is that this is brand new stuff here that has not been looked at, but by very, very few authors. Stephen Mailer commented on it, as I mentioned. Andrew Collins, who I'll also be talking with in the subscriber section. It turns out that place is very near and dear to his heart, too, but he hasn't publicly written about it. It's not that it's a secret place. It's just simply unexplored. But once we begin to just take a cursory glance at it, I mean, visiting it 3 times is hardly a beginning. But once we get into this place, I think we're going to make some astonishing, even more astonishing discoveries.
William, let me ask you this. What do you think that people who try to prevent these discoveries from being revealed or made, or who damage our knowledge like this, what do you think happens to their souls?
Well, do they have them?
Well, that's true. The lady on the cover of Communion, when I asked her whether or not human beings had souls, you know what her answer was? She said, not all. Not all.
Right. I just don't see how a person with a soul could totally lose their conscience and give it over to another power authority for, I don't have any idea what possible reward they might get out of it, but hey, the stakes are increasing practically on a daily basis, it seems, and
well, they
all
are.
we can do is do the best possible job that we can to reveal this data. In fact, I did have a conversation with Stephen Mailer about it before I posted the article about Abu Ghurab, saying, Stephen, one, I'm a little concerned about publishing this for fear that weekend warriors will begin to run over this place. And secondly, do we really want those in the know to know what we know about this place, or should we just quietly go about our business until we have a more important revelation to make about it? And ultimately, I decided the best course is to publish the article, to talk about it, because it has to come out into the open. This is critical research that validates, in my opinion, more of what Sitchin is saying about the Anunnaki. This, in my view, is an Anunnaki site, and it is totally unexplored.
And this is where the Egyptians said the Netirs came. They landed. Physical manifestation here.
That's right. This is the oldest ceremonial center on the planet. This is the place where the gods came down. This is the Stargate. This is the original place. And it's absolutely remarkable that it would so closely parallel Teotihuacan. In fact, as we'll talk in our discussion about Atlantis, one of the Egyptian myths talks about the original island of the egg, where formless beings, light beings, came to Earth and created the original mound or pyramid, called, again, the island of the egg. And by the edge of this island was a place they called the Field of Reeds, spelled R-E-E-D-S, the Field of Reeds. Teotihuacan was called the Place of Reeds. So when you start to see that both places are identified, a place of creation is the Place of Reeds, Teotihuacan is called the Place of Reeds, you sort of get the impression that we might be talking about the same place. And in fact, the place that they're talking about...
Two places that did the same thing.
Or places that did the same thing. And when you come along and you note, as Ted St. Rain did, that Abu Ghurab appears to perform the same function as Teotihuacan, you have to begin to wonder, is Abu Ghurab, in fact, the original island of the egg? It's where the formless beings, the light beings, came to Earth and originally landed, and then they created this, what is it, a food processing facility, some kind of a power plant? Maybe it's all of the above. But the connection is absolutely extraordinary to me, and I'm continuing to follow it up and looking forward to, again, talking with Stephen Mailer about it and talking with Andrew Collins about it, because he, too, has written about the island of the egg and I know has a deep interest in this and has also located the original island of the egg, the place where the gods first came down, in this neighborhood where Abu Ghurab is located. So it's going to be a very exciting conversation with both gentlemen.
You know, I meditated for years with somebody who was mostly formless, and when it was obviously was a struggle for him to become to show form, and when he did, he had to remain completely still, the least movement, and he was gone again. And I wonder what they might have looked like, the Anunnaki.
Well, you know, again, this isn't the Anya Nadell show, but her work in this case offers such tantalizing hints that I can't resist mentioning this. Her mandala called Wisdom not only matches the precise pattern of the Abu Ghurab alabaster platform, but she too has a circle in the middle of it, just like there is at Abu Ghurab. Inside the middle of the circle of her mandala is what she calls an Atlantean fairy. And I wonder, is this Atlantean fairy, which looks sort of like a cross between a human and a butterfly, what these beings may have looked like? Is it possible that she tapped into this Stargate consciousness, as I call it, that it appears to be encoded there at Abu Ghurab? Is this maybe a far memory that she had? There are numerous traditions that talk about the Anunnaki as being what they call the fair folk, spelled F-A-I-R. And the idea is that, well, maybe they were pale-skinned, white-skinned. I mean, even Andrew Collins describes the Anunnaki as tall, white-haired, pale-skinned, possibly blue-eyed. So they're the fair folk. But then what we're told is that the Catholic...
William,
yeah.
Anne is sitting there in the back whispering, the tall whites, the tall whites.
The tall whites, right.
Yes.
And then the church comes along.
I don't know if you hear her cursing back there, folks, but she's pretty excited.
Then the church comes along and says, wait a minute, these Anunnaki, these tall whites, we can't have that. The fair folk, let's add a Y to their name. Now they become
the fairy folk.
The fairy folk. And
William,
so,
we have come to the end of our time together on Dreamland this week, but don't despair, folks, because not only is William going to be talking with Stephen Mailer in the subscriber section this week, next week William is going to be back with us on Dreamland, and what we're going to be talking about now is this very thing, the tall whites, the Atlantis connection, and we're going to come to a conclusion, a phenomenal conclusion, I think, that is going to be the next step in understanding what this is really all about. We're breaking new ground. Don't miss next week's Dreamland with William Henry, his website, williamhenry.net. Go to his lectures. They are well worth attending. Believe me, I have done it. His great new DVD set gives you a wonderful sample of just what he can do for your mind and spirit. Next up on Dreamland, Linda Moulton Howe. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer who investigates new and unusual aspects of science, medicine, and the environment. She's got a special report for us on two different subjects. First, the Earth's rotation speed is changing, and second, an ice circle, very, very rare phenomenon, has formed in Michigan with huge lights in the sky observed by witnesses. It's mystifying scientists. Here she is from Philadelphia, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. As we think about time changing, as we change the calendar to 2004, even the time of our planet's rotation appears to have changed, at least for the time being. For centuries, humans have kept time astronomically. And then in 1949, the Federal Bureau of Standards produced the world's first atomic clock, which basically counts the rates of vibration in atoms. And in the case of the Bureau of Standards, it's cesium atoms. And since 1949, we continued to build and improve atomic clocks. And then in 1972, we went to an international timekeeping system around the world with atomic clocks based on cesium. When we did that, what scientists found was that the Earth was always slowing down a little bit, and they had to add what they called a leap second periodically after 1972 in order to keep the atomic clocks in the Earth and its Earth time synchronous. But starting 5 years ago, for the very first time, leap seconds suddenly didn't need to be added because something unknown has increased the Earth's spin. I talked about this phenomenon this week with Fred McGeehan at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Boulder, Colorado.
The reason that we have not had to insert a leap second for the past 5 years is that the rate of the Earth's spin on its own axis has actually sped up a bit. Scientists aren't absolutely sure why. Some of the speculation has to do with there could be some shifts in the Earth's molten core. It could be some tidal changes that can affect the Earth, or it could be the Earth's weather, such as warming of the Earth, where you might not have a melting of glaciers. So no one is absolutely sure why, but there is an agency in Paris, the International Earth Rotation Service, that measures the rate of the Earth's rotation they see that that rate is getting out of sync with atomic timekeeping, they order the insertion of the so-called leap seconds. But they have not had to do that for the past 5 years, and that's what we've been reporting this year.
And so what baffles scientists is what could be causing the Earth to speed up just enough that they don't have to add this leap second.
Exactly. And as I say, there's speculation. I'm sure some people, would say, well, it could be caused by global warming. But as I say, no one knows for absolutely sure.
Now, would you explain that a little bit more? Because when I think of global warming and I think of our having then a thicker atmosphere of CO2, you would think that would be a bigger drag on the Earth's rotation, not speed it up.
Take the example, say, of a skater ice skater, who spins on their own axis. When they extend their arms, they slow a bit, and then as they pull their arms into their body, that spin speeds up. So, for instance, if there's not as much ice and snow on our mountain peaks and the glaciers, and that is changing, in effect, the shape of the Earth, then you could have an effect of speeding up.
Now, if this speeding up continues and it begins to be that we'd have to subtract a leap second in order to stay in time with the cesium clock, what are the implications?
Well, I don't think anyone has postulated that we may need to do that. Right now, in effect, the Earth is behaving very well as a clock, and I haven't heard any speculation as to what may happen if we needed to subtract a second.
And as Earth mysteries emerge each year, it seems that many of us have wondered if the global mystery of crop formations might be a warning or anticipation of Earth changes like this, speeding up the rotation of the Earth, or global warming, or many things that may not yet be on the horizon as we move into 2004 and beyond. And in this decade or so of crop formations around the world has been another extreme rarity called ice circles. Maybe 4 have been reported in the United States in the last 10 to 12 years. And most recently, in December, came something not only unusual in terms of the pattern on the ice, but it was linked by a resident near the lake where this ice circle has emerged with a light so intense, so brilliant, that at between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning, the man was stopped in his tracks in his house as he saw this strange, brilliant light over the top of the hill right above where the ice circle was to be found about 10 days later. And here now from Michigan, a little west of Ann Arbor, near a place called Liberty Township, a few miles south of Jackson, Michigan, and the lake is called Mud Lake. A man who has lived there for years, works in lapidary, knows the landscape very well. His name is Vaughn Hobie. And on December 18th at 1:30 in the morning, here is what he saw.
I was closing up house for the night, and as I turned around to walk through the dining room and looked out the back windows, you couldn't help but notice the most incredibly brilliant light. My first thought was somebody was back on the hill. My second thought was, who would be out on that hill on a night like tonight? For it was like 15 degrees, and we had 40-mile-an-hour winds blowing, and it was cold. But it was such a brilliant white light, it was captivating. It only illuminated a narrow area, about 2 inches at arm's length, at a hill about 900 feet out. It wasn't that much of a hill, but it was enough to see that there were, 8 or 10 trees being lit up between me and it.
So it really was a narrow focus, whatever this beam was.
Yes, it was a very narrow focus. The most intense, brilliant white light it was so brilliant, I couldn't discern if the trees were being lit from in front, from a light on top of the hill, or silhouetted from the back, from a light behind the hill. It had no color, it never wavered, and as it went above the treetops, it just disappeared, because the sky was quite clear at the time. I had watched it for about 20 minutes, from 1:30 to 10 till 2.
Okay. And in the 20 minutes that you watched this brilliant light, did it have a shape, and did it move?
It never moved, and I could discern no shape.
And if you were
it was actually hard to look at right at the top of the hill. It was so bright.
And if you were comparing it to anything that you might have seen that it resembled, what would that be?
I have seen some, on a rainy night, some of the new super white headlights.
Right.
Okay. That brilliant, dazzling white.
Right.
But that wet, brilliant glow you'd get on a wet night versus a dry night.
Right.
But it had no shading of blue or no shading of yellow. It was just pure white.
And at an arm's length distance, it would have been about what size?
About 2 inches across.
And if it's 2 inches across, how high would it have been? What kind of shape are you looking at? Is it like a cylinder? Is it round?
Well, this is what I'm really still working out in my mind here. But I would say the light that I could see was about 3/4 as high as it was long. So it might have been like 1 1/4 inches by 2 inches, like a bar there.
Oh, I see. More like a horizontal bar.
Right.
And the light that it was casting down at an arm's length distance, you thought was like about 2 inches, and yet, even then, as bright as it was hurting your eyes, it only lighted up a few trees.
Right. Yeah, it was like jet black to either side of it. It was so bright.
And in those 20 minutes, it didn't move, but then, how did it disappear?
I don't know. I went to bed. I convinced myself it was the moon setting over the hill. Because it was about that size, like you just seen a moon set on the horizon.
Okay, now, when did you make the possible link that there might be something over there?
Oh, I didn't make the link until we saw the circle. Starting that day after of seeing the light, we had several days where we accumulated snow. And the snow had blown across the lake and accumulates at this end. So the lake you could see was windswept, but at this end, maybe 100 feet out into the lake, on up to the shore, it went up, 7 or 8 inches deep. So as we were moving brush back there, cleaning the property, there was nothing to see. You'd look out on the lake, and it was just white snow at this end. But then at Christmas, things started to melt. And when we went out on the Sunday after Christmas, there in the snow it looked like someone had come down with a snowmobile and done a perfect circle and decided, the ice isn't safe or something, and left. So to us, it just looked like a 6 foot wide or so jet black circle melded down into the snow.
Then at that
right
point,
down to the surface of the ice.
At that point, when you first saw it, then was it like a ring?
Like a ring.
Okay, like a ring, not a solid circle.
Right, not a solid circle.
And in that ring, the ring was darker where it was thinner, and then was that ring surrounding white-looking ice in the middle?
No, it was to the snow. So you had snow in the middle, and you had snow all around it, and then you had this dark ring that was melted right down to the surface of the lake.
So the first thing that you saw from the top of the hill was a ring, not a solid circle.
Correct. And a halo going around the outside ring.
And a halo around the ring.
Right. As if the snow had melted differently than it was melting elsewhere.
At that point, when you're on top of that hill and you're looking down at this dark ring on the ice, did the thought go through your head at that point and about that strange white light you had seen on the night of the 18th?
Yes, immediately. Because it was directly in line. And also because it wasn't there before. That ring had to have appeared sometime before the snow fell, but it wasn't there the day before, or the week, the days before, because there was no snow.
This is Linda Moulton Howe, and when Dreamland returns after this break, we'll hear what investigators found at this Michigan ice circle. In the summer of 2003, Jeffrey Wilson and Ted Robertson investigated the Ohio crop formations near the Serpent and the Sipe Mounds that I've reported about in Dreamland Online. They went to see this lake, this mud lake formation in the ice on January 1st, 2004, New Year's Day, to measure and to take some ice core samples. They found that the whole circle area from one side to the other was almost perfect, measuring 62 feet one way and 64 feet the other. And at the center core of this circle in the ice, between 28 and 32 feet in diameter, it was clear, as if the center of this large circle in the ice had been pure water and had quickly frozen. And no one knows how many times this may have happened since the December 18th snow, but we do know that this was not there in the lake the day before because there was no snow and no ice. And as they examined this circle, they found that in the center, where the ice was thin, it went out into two areas of what they are calling a brighter white splash pattern that is still unexplained. And in your mind's eye, as you listen, you can also go to earthfiles.com and you will be able to see photographs of this very interesting circle in the ice in which there appears to be two sections as if water somehow froze, refroze with more air in it, making a very white circle around the very thin center circle. And this week, I talked with Jeffrey Wilson and Ted Robertson out in the hours after they had returned from this mud lake circle to describe what it was that they saw. The first person that you will hear will be Jeffrey Wilson, followed by Ted Robertson.
We considered that. We also considered the fact that the description of the light beam was such that it was narrower as it got towards the ground and got wider as it went up higher. And that might seem to indicate that the source may have been at the ground level, and as it got higher, the beam extended out wider. We considered both possibilities as to what the source, what direction the source is coming from. What we're struggling with is that the water there is only about 2 or 3 inches before you start hitting the sediment underneath, and there is no sediment that's frozen in the splash pattern above on top of the ice. Mm-hmm. It's just completely clear water, so there's no sedimentation that's mixed in with the ice to have been splashed out from underneath down below, and it's not very deep water. So
Jeff,
that's kind of what we're struggling with at this point.
Well, if something had hit in that thin, narrow, or that shallow water and splashed mud, what you're saying is you would have seen it in that splash pattern. But
and that's not there.
Yeah, if it's not there, what is causing the discoloration of the splash pattern?
Well, what we're thinking of is if it had been open water, then there could, because the wind was blowing, it could have splashed the water above, just the top layer of water above out onto the ice, and you wouldn't necessarily see sedimentation going along with it.
But still, the mechanics of how it would have been made in that snowstorm, even with clear water in the center, is puzzling.
It is very puzzling, and that's what we're sort of brainstorming right now to try and figure out what are the possibilities that could even come close to explaining what we're seeing.
We do notice that the center of this ice circle is thinner, and in the center, it had just recently probably froze in the last 2 or 3 days because the water was clear and it was very thin. In fact, the man who who discovered it wanted to mark it with a pole, so we tipped out the center, and I actually reached my arm in there to see if anything had fallen in there, and it was cold, but I didn't feel anything. We probed it we actually took a core sample of mud, but there's just a lot of roots down there.
So this is how you guys know that it's 3 to 4 inches of ice, 3 to 4 inches of clear water, and about 3 feet of muck below?
That's right, yeah, from reaching in there. And the ice was cracking. We would hear audible sounds of ice cracking when 3 or 4 people were flustered, but we hadn't fallen in. So.
Oh, wow. Well, listen, another question. Is it possible, from what you've analyzed so far, if that was open water in the center circle, could the splash pattern be snow that was there, melted, and then re-iced?
Absolutely. It could have been slush. In fact, I'm leaning towards slush. You know, it looks kind of like it was built up. This was snowing at the time. It snowed, and then it melted, and then probably snowed again, and then probably melted. And it's really difficult to say what this was.
And yet there's that third section, if I understand correctly, that goes out beyond the first major splash pattern. There is a kind of like a third section.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing is raised up a little bit. It's like a splash pattern within a splash pattern. I don't know if it was cut into, but we can't see a clear ring of cut ice because it has refroze, or maybe that was never there. But it's very subtle, and it's oddly shaped. This is really actually only 10 feet from a reed bed, which is right at the edge of the lake, so it's not like way in the middle. And it fits into a cove, sort of. It's almost being placed, like it's not just randomly put there.
Just now, based on your intuition and having been there, that this could have been something that impacted and went through that water and created that circle?
Well, initially, that's why we called it a splash pattern, because that's what it looks like mostly. And we could have said, well, this could have been like a meteorite impact or something. But again, there's no plant material or dirt or anything that has splashed up and out. Mm-hmm. It's only water. So because the water depth there is so shallow, we can't see a way that if something impacted there with any velocity to have created such a wide area that's been affected, how that could not have brought up any of the material from below.
And the circumstantial link is that column of white light that was seen.
The only evidence that at this point that could give us an indication of what may have transpired.
This is Linda Moulton-Howe from EarthFiles.com for Dreamland.
That he doesn't want people to find things before he does, so that he will be able to steal them and sell the artifacts, or is it something else, more darker even than that?
I think that I leaned a little bit more towards the dark side, Whitley. My personal view, there was such intense activity on the Giza Plateau, specifically around the Sphinx, in the years from 1996 to 1998 and 1999. And then all of a sudden, there's absolutely nothing. It's been 6-7 years since anybody has really talked about any of this activity, about the Hall of Records underneath the Sphinx and these chambers loaded with artifacts. In my view, my intuition, I think he's already found something. I think he's already got the goods, and now all he's doing is standing guard and making sure that no newcomers come along and discover what it is that he might have found and attempt to really bring out the truth of what's going on the Giza Plateau.
Now, why would that be? Since it would seem that since this would be so important to mankind, it would vastly increase the prestige of Egypt.
Yeah, but it would diminish the prestige of Allah at the same time, and that's the problem. I think they are completely motivated not just by politics, but also by religion, because it counters the whole idea that these phenomenal machines, which is what I believe the Great Pyramid is, were built not by the Egyptians, but by an earlier race. And what they come along with then is that, well, if you don't believe that the Egyptians built the pyramids, then you must be a racist, because you're trying to deny Egypt its heritage, and you're trying to say that the Egyptian people don't have the capability of doing this. And in fact, that's not what we're saying at all. What we are saying is that up until 1932, before the time of the Nazis, it was a well-established belief in Egyptology that this ancient race existed that had a superior technology, and they were referred to as a have to tiptoe around on eggshells as concerned Zahi Hawass, that he makes it difficult even for the National Geographic Channel to acquire filming permits and to get into certain sites, because he's so paranoid, apparently, in my view, about what a person might discover there. So I was pleasantly surprised by the open-mindedness of the producers and the cameraman that was with us, who, by the way, was the cameraman for the Josh Bernstein show, the hit show on the History Channel called Digging for the Truth. The gentleman that was with us is the cameraman. His name's Rich Confalone. He's Josh Bernstein's cameraman as well, and so I've got a lot of insight into how Josh Bernstein puts his shows together. It was really great on-the-job training. But what I'm wanting to say is that they were incredibly open-minded. Rich has been all over the world with Josh Bernstein looking at sites, and one of the places that we went together, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, Abu Ghraib, he said was probably the strangest place he's ever been. The producer, Cara Biaga, was completely open-minded in terms of my perspective. She listened to my lecture. She sat in on the lecture. She followed us around for 5 days, and by the end she said, you know what? I get it. I get what you're saying. I get where you're coming from. And she was actually really excited about how this opens up the whole Atlantis argument in a brand new way.
Now, we're going to go on to the actual experience in just a moment, to Abu Ghraib in particular. But before that, I'm still sort of in modern times because of the Zahi Hawass issue, which is an issue. It's an issue for everybody, in not only in areas like you study, but also in more conventional archaeology. And what is happening there? Do you think he's involved in seeking out? Is it from a journey? William Henry is back from his 14 days in Egypt with new discoveries, and William has spent a lot of time in Egypt with the National Geographic Channel and a number of lucky people who signed up for this tour. And William, this is not really a tour. It's something else that you do there. Is that correct?
Well, our tours are really explorations, Whitley. It's a gathering of minds and souls who are there to join together to try and root out the answers to the questions that have perplexed us for a long time. Where did we come from? What are we doing here? And for some of us, how do we leave?
How do we leave? The question is becoming more and more urgent, and it will be, within 10 years, the central question among human beings. That is, and that makes this work that you're doing all the more urgent. Before we get into the actual journey and some of the stunning discoveries that you've made, let's talk a little bit about the actual experience of being in Egypt now, which is, of course, not far from Iraq. It's a Muslim country. What did you feel a sense of hostility or anything at all?
No sense of hostility whatsoever on the well-beaten tourist path that we were on. In fact, the only time that I came into contact with a person that might have what you might call hostile was in a marketplace, and that one of the questions I always ask you is, where are you from? And some of the people in our group would say they're from Canada or elsewhere, but I had no problem saying I was from America and I'm an American. He said, well, we really like your people, but we hate your government. I said, well, that's kind of funny because a lot of people on the tour sort of feel the same way. So we have something in common after all.
Well, that was a diplomatic way of addressing the issue. Now, you said you were on a well-beaten tourist trail, which you were, but not so well-beaten, actually, for someone who's looking through it with the eyes of William Henry. Tell us a little bit about the National Geographic Channel and why they followed you.
Well, about a month before we were to depart on the trip, they contacted us. They had been looking at one of the works by a gentleman who was joining us on the trip and thought that they might be interested in interviewing him, which it turns out they weren't. And along the way, they came upon the research that I had been doing and my insistence that if you really want to know about Atlantis, which was the subject of the documentary that they were working on, if you want to know about Atlantis, you have to look to Egypt. And the reason is because Plato's story of Atlantis originated in Egypt. And so when I started talking with the producer, her name's Cara Biaga, it made a lot of sense to her. She said they're kind of over or tired of the same old story all the time about Atlantis, the KC predictions, the geologist theory that the explosion of the volcano on Thera resolves the Atlantis question. And so they had been down that path so many times before, and what they were looking for was a breath of fresh air or a new perspective on this story. And so they signed up for the trip with us, came along, and I think the result is going to be quite interesting.
Well, I should say so, because the National Geographic Channel has certainly a history of going very much down the conventional pathway with this type of documentary. And one would think that they would go to Egypt, talk to Zahi Hawass, laugh at someone like you, and that would be it. Did you get the impression that was what was going to happen?
Exactly the opposite, Whitley. In fact, when we were making the arrangements for the trip, they acknowledged that they super race as an advanced race, but now individuals such as Zahi Hawass are doing absolutely everything they can to discredit this notion, and in so doing, they're denying ancient human history.
Now, isn't this even larger than that, though? The Viking orbiter found an image on the surface of Mars of a face. I had that image studied at some of the best laboratories of that era. And in fact, even laboratories that were used by the National Security Agency for studying and analyzing aerial photography of the Earth and satellite photography of the Earth, using the same equipment that they used for the NSA, equipment that was then so secret that when we went into the lab, the equipment that they were actually working on had to be covered. We couldn't even see the buttons and so forth. Now, the more recent orbiters come with more detailed imagery, and it's quite clear to the imagers who did the original Viking material for me that the actual object on Cydonia was changed. It's not the same as it was when it was first seen from a distance by Viking. In other words, it's been changed on the ground, William. And I can't get them to commit to this in an interview. But they're telling me this and have been telling me this for years. Now, that is extraordinary, and it suggests that there is somebody with those same powers still around who is proactively trying to keep mankind in the dark. And maybe even when you look at the modern religions, they are part of a much larger process of blinding